Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July 2024 presentation of the Friends of History First Wednesday Lecture Series. I'm Ben Woodbury with the Friends of History and will be your host today. These monthly lectures are being provided free of charge by the Friends of History with the support from the New Mexico History Museum and from donations from our audience. Joining us today are Enrique Lamadrid and José Rivera. Enrique is a distinguished professor emeritus of Spanish who taught literature, culture, and folklore at the University of New Mexico. He has organized a series of ethnographic field schools, several of which have featured Acequia culture in New Mexico and Chihuahua. Lamadrid edits the Querencias series of the UNM Press, named after a popular Spanish term used to express love of place and people. He published the late Esteban Arellano 2014 monograph, Enduring Acequias, Wisdom of the Land, Knowledge of the Water, and collaborated with him on a celebrated children's book, Juan the Bear and the Water of Life, La Acequia de Juan del Oso, on the history and legends of the Mora Valley acequias. Lamadrid is also on a team preparing a UNESCO nomination of New Mexico's acequia traditions for World Intangible Cultural Heritage designation. José Rivera holds degrees in English literature from New Mexico Highlands University and the University of Arizona, and a Ph.D. in social policy from Brandeis University. He spent his academic career at the University of New Mexico, teaching courses in public administration, water resources, and community and regional planning. He has published several articles on community acequias of the Rio Grande and mutual aid societies of the Southwest. His books include Acequia Culture, Water, Land, and Community in the Southwest, published by UNM, drawing on their co-edited anthology, Water for the People, the Acequia Heritage of New Mexico in a Global Context, published by UNM Press in 2023. Enrique and Jose join us today to highlight Acequia communities' culture, use, and history in New Mexico and worldwide. This includes those in northern Mexico, Chile, Peru, Argentina, Spain, the Middle East, Nepal, and the Philippines, placing New Mexico's acequia heritage in its inherent sustainable design within a global framework. The lush landscapes of the upper Rio Grande watershed created by acequias dating from as far back as the late 16th century continue to irrigate their communities today despite threats of prolonged drought, urbanization, private water markets, extreme water scarcity, and climate change. Water for the People celebrates acequia practices and traditions worldwide and shows how these ancient irrigation systems continue to provide arid regions with a model for water governance, sustainable food systems, and community traditions that reaffirm a deep cultural and spiritual relationship with the land year by year. So now, let us now welcome Enrique Lamadrid and Jose Rivera.
Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to this conversation. And it is a conversation rather than a lecture. So we are going to take you deep into the world of acequias, the acequia communities. And like we always say, community in New Mexico starts at the head gates, because people would, as they started to occupy the land that they would be living on, the first thing that they would do is get a source of water to be able to live there. So they secured acequias before they built houses, before they built places of worship. So they put in the acequias, they got their communities going, and it changed the landscape. It made the desert bloom. So we'd like to acknowledge all of these long lived acequia communities, these 400-year-old and more acequia communities in New Mexico as part of something global, which is what we're showing in this book. And so we acknowledge these ancestors. We are here because they persisted.
Yes, and I'd like to add just acknowledgments, just a little footnote. We also want to thank Baker Morrow for inviting Enrique and myself to be part of a new series that he just started with the University of New Mexico a couple of years ago called New Century Gardens and Landscapes on the American Southwest. Baker Morrow, thank you for having invited us and making this publication possible.
Yeah, so many people to thank. We have 22 different writers to thank. It was amazing working with them. And so we are going to introduce you now to some of their work that's come to us from all over the state and all over the world. The History Museum audiences are some of the most curious people in the entire state, and we're just very pleased to do this presentation. We wrote this for you, not for other scholars. And it's customary these days to acknowledge the place that we're in. We're using Santa Fe. We begin with Santa Fe. We're all in Santa Fe today. So we stand and draw our breath on traditional lands of the Tewa people. Ogapoge Winge, White Shell Water Place, now Santa Fe, Nuevo Mexico. Surrounding us are the landscapes of Pueblo, Apache, and Navajo communities whose people continue to maintain vital connections to this place. We strive to maintain respectful and mutually beneficial relationships with these communities. We honor the ancestral stewards of this land and celebrate their past, present, and future. So, Jose, maybe you should introduce Stanley Crawford to everybody. We'll begin with a memorial moment. He recently left us. He's the writer who documented so much of his daily life as a farmer and irrigator in the Embudo Valley. And this is his book, Mayordomo, Chronicle of an Acequia in Northern New Mexico. Any comments, Jose?
Yes, Stanley Crawford really was the first writer to publish a book about the acequias. Before this, there had been journal articles and maybe some essays and short pieces written in magazines or in other places, but a full-length book, first came out in the 1980s, and it was written by Stanley Crawford called Mayordomo, Chronicle of an Acequia in Northern New Mexico. And this is the new cover for the book. And there's also one from he first published it in the 1980s. And unfortunately, we lost him this year, 2024, as indicated there in his timeline. But we certainly honor him and recognize him for having put acequias on the map. And I mean literally, because friends of ours from other countries, Mexico, Spain, that we encountered, later, they have copies of this book, okay? And they bring it with them. One of them brought it to New Mexico during a conference that we had. We invited people from Valencia, Spain, and some other countries, and one of them brought this book and he showed it to me and he said, "Look, I brought my Ordomo with me." He showed it to me like that. So anyway, that's the impact that this book has had on the world literature about acequias.
Yeah, terrific guy. Amazing garlic farmer. And proceeding, we need to talk about Jose. I was about ready to call him the dean of acequia research in New Mexico. He is. He's got an incredible archive. He's researched, done field work all over the world, and this is his book, Acequia Culture, and it did come out in translation with a terrific cover. la cultura de la acequia. So just to make our viewers aware of some of the stuff that's been done. He also went all the way to the Philippines to do acequia research. This seems almost counterintuitive. Why would a tropical place need acequias? Well, some tropical places have extreme dry and wet seasons. And so during the dry season, there's a lot of irrigation going on in the communities of Ilocos. And so this book is a really great indicator of how far afield Jose has gone to make his research, his books, what they are. The other one, here's the children's book that we were mentioning. It's done very well. It's dedicated to the New Mexico Acequia Association. And this next one is, of course, the cover of our current book. And we're going to go ahead and get into the story. Last 2 years ago, in the spring, about this time of year, we were going to press. Everything was done. Everything was signed, sealed, and delivered. And they were delivering the manuscript to be printed. And the Mora fires happened. And we pulled up a red flag and just said, we've got to hold back on this. We've got to acknowledge this tragedy. And it's just almost overwhelming. That summer, we followed it every day. Jose and I did. This is artist Paula Jaramillo surveying her family's land in a valley near Mora into the national forest. They worked so hard to get a perpetual conservation easement so that it would never turn into a trophy house development or anything like that. And it just was burnt to a crisp. There was a huge ponderosa pine right there, and the fire was so hot it just kept burning down and burned even all of the roots clear down into the ground. So, but the people of Mora are resilient, and they are getting through this. They've been farming and irrigating in the Mora Valley, including Jose's family, since early on, since probably about the 1820s. As soon as the Comanche Wars ended in 1786, this area opened up for settlement. And so we acknowledge this great tragedy, the suffering of the people, and think of them every day as they try to move forward. So many farms lost, so many people forced out. And I'll turn it over to Jose at this point.
Yes, this slide really explains the origin of this book, Water for the People. And what happened was in the year 2014, 10 years ago, the New Mexico Acequia Association was invited to go to Valencia, Spain. Okay, because at that time, the Tribunal de las Aguas de la Vega de Valencia, the water tribunal of the Valencia Acequias, and the Consejo de Hombres Buenos de Murcia, another province nearby, they're both on the eastern Spain Mediterranean. They were both celebrating their 5th anniversary for having been listed in the UNESCO papers for their intangible cultural heritage. So here it is, it's a big event, 5th anniversary of being in the UNESCO list. Okay, now there happened to be an international symposium going on at one of the universities there at the same time. And it was a world symposium, international symposium. Of all the acequia groups from everywhere, other countries, other regions, the only acequia organization that was invited to attend this ceremony in Valencia at the cathedral. You see the cathedral in the background. That's really the side door. But that's where this event takes place every Thursday at noon, what they call the water court. Okay, the tribunal, the tribunal meets there. Those the gentlemen on the bottom right-hand corner are the water judges. They're síndicos, they're called in Valenciano language, their language. But they're also irrigators. They're head acequieros. They're heads of the presidents of their acequia association. There's 7 or 8 acequias in all of Valencia, and then some more in Murcia. So they hold this water court, and the New Mexico Acequia Association was invited to be there as a guest during the 5th anniversary of UNESCO. While there, it just didn't stop with an invitation. They also celebrated at the Jardín Botánico, the botanical gardens at the University of Valencia the evening before, and they signed an agreement of collaboration, basically an alliance to join together and work to the preservation of acequias and to exchange culturally in other ways. They received an honor, 2 honors really. You can see that again, if we look at the bottom right image again, you see the water judges there looking down. The gentleman who's signing that book, okay, is from here. Some of you probably know him, Don Bustos of Santa Cruz Farms near Española. Okay, at the time, he was the secretario of the New Mexico Acequia Association. So he headed up the delegation that went to Valencia, Spain. Enrique and I were both there, as well as some other professors, Silvia Rodriguez from UNM, Sam Fernald from New Mexico State, and others. So he signed this book, and in Spanish, they call it the Libro de Oro, the Golden Book. And they asked him after the water court was over, because by the way, there were 2, violations that were reported to this water court during that session, and for violating the rules of the acequias, and they were both found culpable. They call them in Spanish over there denunciados, the denounced ones. But anyway, so after the water court, the judges had heard the case and found them culpable, and they established a fine that they would have to pay, just like the rules here in New Mexico. There's multas, fines if you don't follow the water rules, the acequia rules. So he was presented with his book, and he was asked to please write down your memory of this event and what it meant to you. So there he is, busy. He took quite a while. If you want to read what he wrote into this golden book, read his chapter. He's got a chapter in Water for the People. Okay, that's what he is putting down there. Then they also received a medal. You see the smaller object on that table. There's a Medal of Honor, like a coin, a coin medal. And those are the 2 honors that the Acequia Association received on that day, September 2014.
Okay, so a lot to cover. There's so many chapters. What we have here in New Mexico, and Jose is really good at explaining this. We call them acequias Iberoamericanas. Spain, as its empire grew almost overnight from one decade to the next, it took its water culture, it took its acequia culture all over the world. And of course, to reach New Mexico, it came up through northern Mexico. We've done field work there. The lower slide on the right is a tunnel actually built by miners during the day, farmers on the weekends, or vice versa. And anyway, the slide on the upper right is the Generalife Garden at the Alhambra in Granada, and that whole water system is gravity fed. It's just amazing. And of course, on the left, we've got the acequias of New Mexico pictured there for you. There's precedents to all of this. These were built on systems that were already here. Irrigation, one reason that people moved to the Rio Grande Valley is because droughts were hitting other areas of the Southwest. They needed to be able to have their agriculture and survive. So as the empire expanded, a lot was exchanged. Whole lists of plants and animals went both directions across the Atlantic and really changed the world forever. And on the top, we're going to talk about it a little bit later. These are the gardens of Aranjuez, of the former hunting preserve and the palace, a rural area south of Madrid, where the king, a very enlightened king, decided that he wanted to really make these new plants work in Europe. And so they're like demonstration gardens. And on the top right, the same thing happens in Mexico, in Tlaxcala. Halfway to Mexico City, Cortez stops. There's battles, and the Tlaxcaltecas are outnumbering the Spanish, but they said, why are we fighting each other when there's a common enemy in Mexico City, Tenochtitlan? And so all of the seeds, all of the cuttings that the Spanish were carrying with them, they dropped them off at Tlaxcala. And the same thing happened in Tlaxcala. They adapted them over the next decades to the Mesoamerican climates. But this, of course, is an imperial economy. It's the first world economy. And Philippines is an important part of it because the biggest trade, the biggest economy in the world was China back then, even as it is now. And the link to China was Manila in the Philippines. And so the interesting thing is that where José worked, the Acequias of Ilocos, the missionaries that came in there put in cash crops. They wanted to participate in this global economy. And so people were good at surviving. They raised everything that they needed, but the missionaries said, okay, we need to raise tobacco. Let's put some sugar. Let's do coffee. Let's do spices and dyes, and let's be part of a world economy. So we've got to keep that world perspective going. And back home, of course, this is all built on what was already here. That's, of course, Avanu. That's the Tewa name for the river serpent. It is the river, an embodiment of the river. And there was all kinds of irrigation work going on. Some of it was in catchment bases. People got really good at just catching the rainfall and storing it. And you can see ancestral channels coming from springs. That's up at Pajarito Springs in White Rock Canyon, as we call it today. And then there's agriculture here that's being done with just minimal water. Those are the famous waffle gardens of Zuni that are just carefully tended because people's lives depended on them. Let's see what we've got next. Oh my goodness, I'm doing a lot of talking, José. We can't see what slide is next, but I'll go ahead and José we like doing this tag team. So any point that I've neglected to make, José will let me know about it, and vice versa. Esteban Arellano was a partner in this project, even though he never got to see this book. He passed away kind of in the middle of it. But he had a hunch. He had a hunch about the origins of New Mexico acequias, and he told me, he said, we got to look at the Umayyad dynasty in Arabia. Something's going on there. And of course, the Romans divided Arabia into 3 provinces. One was called Arabia Petria, the stony Arabia and the city of Petra up north. Then the central section is where Medina is, and the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on his name. And the only part of the Arabian Peninsula that had abundant agriculture was Happy Arabia, Arabia Felix. And so there were some conflicts there. There's a kingdom there called Sabah, known in the Bible as Sheba. And this was part of the second caliphate, which crashed politically. The headquarters was in Damascus, and the royal families, the noble families of Sabah had to leave. And where did they go? They went to Andalusia. They went to Cordoba. They went to Murcia. They went to the whole Mediterranean area of Spain, Valencia, and they took their water culture with them. And that's, of course, how it got here through New Spain and then up to New Mexico. All over Yemen, the modern country of Yemen, you can still see these landscapes, these incredible acequia landscapes, the terraced landscapes of the coast of the Red Sea. They catch every bit of mist and the light rainfall that goes there. That's where coffee became an important crop. And they also had irrigation districts. What you see at the top is the Sud Marib, what's left of a huge earthen dam. This is just the spillway. It was comparable in size to Cochiti Dam in New Mexico, and this lasted for 1,000 years. It was breached, but agriculture continued in Sabah, obviously, and unfortunately, in the war between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, the Saudis chose these landscapes and these historical places as military targets, unfortunately. And of course, the UN responded and said, this should not be happening. These are the words. We discovered that we knew that a lot of this heritage comes from Arabic-speaking peoples. We had no idea that these are loan words into Arabic. The word acequia itself comes into Arabic from the Sabaean language, which is no longer spoken. You can hear family names and place names in Yemen, and all of these words that we got from them: alberca, acequia, aljibe, albufera, senya, almuña, and even words like Guadalupe. Wadi means wash. Guadal means a big wash, a big river, Guadalquivir. And so these words came into Spanish and in English, and to English as well. And these are the crops. These are the crops of Yemen. It's just a breadbasket. Notice that they're European crops, except look in the lower left corner. Corn takes over the world and just spreads from the Americas. It's credited with nourishing Africa. Modern Africa without corn cultivation would be inconceivable. So, Jose, you know these words. Look at all the words from Arabic that we have of just the things that we still grow, that are still part of our lives. Look at all of those. We use the old word for apricot in New Mexico, albarcoque, straight out of Arabic. Alfalfa, a lot of people forget about how important alfalfa is in the agriculture economy. It's a primary feed for cattle and other grazing animals, cotton, and just down the list. Arroz, one of my favorite Arabic words isn't even on this list. It's candy. It's candy. They were the first people to kind of put confections together and very, very fancy candies. And candy is an Arabic word. So here we are back in Spain. I'll turn this one over to Jose. We were there.
Yes, we talked a little bit about Valencia and the Tribunal de las Aguas de La Vega in Valencia, and I briefly mentioned that the other UNESCO heritage site is the Hombres Buenos, the good men or the wise men of Murcia. And this is their place. Okay, so what happened was just before that September 2014 conference in Valencia, we went a few days early and we met up with Enrique Lamadrid and his son Armando Lamadrid in Murcia. They were coming down from Spain. We had already been in Alicante, which is still part of Valencia. It's one of the towns in the region of Valencia. So we met at this cathedral. You see the bottom right-hand slide there. That's where we met in the plaza. There was a little coffee area there you just can't see. And, so we agreed on a certain day and a certain time, let's meet there. So then we can then go and look at and tour the acequias of Murcia. So we did that. We had Armando hooked up with a student activist by the name of Pedro. And Pedro's the one that took us on this tour. One of the places he took us is the Asud Mayor. Asud, by the way, is the Arabic term for diversion dam, or what we would call in Spanish here, the presa. So there's the presa or diversion dam on the upper left-hand corner. We're standing right on top of it, and it irrigates the whole area of Murcia. It's a very fertile area. Of course, it's heavily urbanized, as is Valencia by this time. But there you see one of the laterals on the lower left. But if you look at the back image, the backdrop there, you can see it's pretty dry. Those are hills or what might be mountains here, but there's hardly anything growing on them, just rock and, other material. So that's the story of Murcia. And while there, this guide, the student academic activist that was very concerned about ways what had to be done to preserve the huerta, as they call it there, the garden landscapes of Murcia, just like the ones in Valencia. There's this monument here to that heritage by way of this water wheel that you can see on the top right, called Noria in Spanish. Okay. Noria in New Mexico usually means a water well, for domestic use, but it also means in Spain and in other countries, this huge overshot water wheel that is turned by the force of water that comes over the top and turns. And of course, that's for grinding of wheat and other grains. And so this place, Murcia, as you see there, is a commercial center for these mills, or we call them in Spanish here, molinos. And so that was another major stopping point when we were in Murcia. And by the way, this chapter was written by Armando Lamadrid, and this is a good place to mention that about 11 of our chapters, came from, people who wrote for the Greenfire Times. The Greenfire Times agreed just a few months after September 2014. They agreed with Armando and Enrique to tell the story of, the acequias, and from different parts of the world, including those from Spain and Mexico and Peru and Argentina and Chile and Philippines and others. And Seth Rothman, the editor of Greenfire Times, agreed to publish it in the February issue of Greenfire Times just a few months after we had returned from Valencia, an incredible accomplishment. So you'll see other chapters by other authors as we move along with these slides.
Yeah, and those norias are so amazing. There's places in the Middle East that have really huge ones, like and Egypt has really good sized ones. This one, just based on the water that's going through the acequia down below, it lifts the water 12, 15 feet to go into an aqueduct and open up a whole other area for cultivation. But like Jose said, I've never seen so many mills in my life. They had mills for pounding and making linen cloth. You have to pound and pound and pound the flax, and if you did it yourself, it would just run you down. And so they have these mills that do it. Murcia, by the way, was a Moorish city, and the interesting thing about it is that whenever anybody would lay siege to it, they would open up the acequias and make an impassable moat around the city. Just they even used the acequias to defend themselves. So now I'll tell the story of Aranjuez in a little more detail. The gardens there are just nothing short of amazing. They're designed in a radial fashion from this royal palace, which was like a weekend palace of Felipe II, the king, and he was intensely interested in agriculture. And what you see up on the left is where the main canal starts, the Acequia Madre, and it's the only acequia I've ever seen where the head gates are made of brass and marble. This is right behind the royal palace. And the Acequia Madre was navigable. They had golden boats, and they had big parties on these boats. The model was Cleopatra on the Nile, right? They would have musicians playing, they'd be feasting and going up and down the Acequia Madre. And all the laterals would go to different areas where they were experimenting with all of the crops that had come over. These are called acclimatization gardens, or jardines de aclimatización, and all the different ecosystems in Spain. This one is most like maybe the middle and upper Mississippi Valley. It gets very hot in the summertime, and there are plants that were brought there centuries ago. There are 350-year-old pecan trees in Aranjuez that were planted there as seedlings from the middle Mississippi River. They specialize in fruit trees, and all of the acres and acres and acres of orchards, and surrounded by corn and more corn and corn and more corn. It's just amazing to see. Some people will go there to see the palace. It's like a lot of other palaces. If you're interested in acequias, it's like the most luxurious acequias in the world, just about. There's some in Persia that are pretty amazing too, and pretty fancy. So here's Tlaxcala. We learned a lot about Tlaxcala from a colleague, Tomas Martinez Saldaña, from Mexico City and from the agriculture school in Texcoco. He's an anthropologist. And Jose and I will both talk about him. It's just amazing to have him here in New Mexico. He got a Fulbright. He helped several of our students get Fulbrights, and he helped us understand the incredible impact that the Tlaxcaltecas had on New Mexico. And you can, that's of course the San Miguel Chapel in Santa Fe. There were a number of Tlaxcalteca Indios Mexicanos, we call them, Mexican Indians. And what that meant back in the day is that they're Nahuatl speaking Indians. Their second language is Spanish. And if you look at the map of the plaza, you can see that half of the plaza is Spanish style, and the other half of the plaza is Tlaxcalan style because they were full partners in the conquest of Mexico. They were the Nahuatl group in central Mexico that had a vision of themselves in the future. And they were more than happy to take the Aztecs down. They thought the Aztecs were kind of a dead end, a military theocracy, and they were ready to go. This scene up above is it 1591, Jose? They're commissioned by the crown to be full partners in the settlement of northern New Spain. And so several clans of them took off. They went north. They founded 24 different cities and towns, and they include Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico as one of them. They were actually there a little bit before Oñate moved the capital from Oquewingue, from Yungue, San Gabriel, down to Santa Fe, and the Tlaxcaltecas were already there. So, any comments about Tomas and his?
Yes, I'd like to add this colleague, Tomas Martinez Saldaña. He called the Tlaxcaltecas soldados campesinos. Okay, this dual role that they were soldiers, soldados, allied in alliance with the Españoles. Okay, with the Spanish. But they were also campesinos. They knew agriculture. They had adapted a lot of these crops that Enrique was talking about to the climate there in Mesoamerica. And they were expert horticulturalists as well as being soldiers. And so here they advanced out of Tlaxcala, and they actually went like in families or at least in groups. There was a head person for each caravan. So there were more than one caravan, there were several. And they just moved up north to the more desert areas of New Spain, because Tlaxcala itself is still quite lush compared to here. And so they advanced northward into places like Saltillo and Parras and what's now Chihuahua. Okay, and along they took with them these seeds that they had already, made acclimatized to the conditions in Mesoamerica. But now they faced another challenge, was then to make them productive in these higher deserts, of northern Mexico and what is now New Mexico as well. And they succeeded. Saltillo, for example, is known for el barrio de Analco. Okay, but there were several of these barrios, neighborhoods, Analco. Analco means the other side of the river. The typical layout was that the Tlaxcaltecas were deeded land and water rights on one side of the river, Saltillo being a prime example, but there were others. That was the typical model. Granted land and water rights on one side of the river. And then the other side of the river was for the Spanish, for their government. Just like you see in Santa Fe, the capital, I'm sorry, not the capital, the Palace of Governors. The first government location in Santa Fe, the Palace of Governors, as we call it now. Okay, that was on one side of the river, but the mission at San Miguel, the chapel that's there in the slide in the middle bottom, okay, that was the other side of the river, one bank and the other bank. And so, but the agriculture in Santa Fe was on the Tlaxcalteca side, on the Mexican Indian side. That's where the agricultural fields were. The other side was for government. Okay. And so they made those lands very, very productive. So that was the typical settlement pattern. And we describe that some, in the book as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. These on the right, at the bottom is a document that grants them a series of guarantees from the crown. They say you are the only indigenous group in Mesoamerica that can own horses, ride them with saddles, armed. You are the only indigenous group that, well, it just goes down the list. And it said and you can, if the Spaniards start encroaching on your lands, you can throw them out. If their animals are getting into your cornfields, you have the right to defend your agriculture. And so these twin settlements are just part of the Camino Real, all up and down, north and south, and clear up to Santa Fe, the most northern of them. And here's the loan words from that language. Look how important corn is, right? Milpa, the cornfield. That's still what we call cornfields in New Mexico. Elote, and this is the tip of the iceberg. There's every kind of corn, even words for corn silk, for different types of corn. Atole, corn porridge, nixtamal, tamales, the dough, pozole, mole, chile, chayote, jote, and so forth. Cacahuate, peanuts, which are so important in Africa, so very important. And here's one of the great tragedies. When people took corn to Spain, they knew that it was 10 times more productive than barley or wheat per acre. Then, it was just tremendously productive. And they had advanced milling technology, so they threw the corn into the mills and started making stuff like polenta. The Italians did it too. And if you're eating corn that's just ground in a mill, you're gonna get sick. You're gonna get sick, because what they were doing in Mexico, since they didn't have mills, is they would throw lime, different kinds of lime on it. The natives of North America would throw wood ash. That's what happened in New Mexico with blue corn. The name for wood ash is, how do you say pozole in English, Jose?
Gosh.
Oh no, it's hominy. Hominy. Hominy is the word for wood ash in one of the languages of North America. So that's what releases the nutrients in corn. If you don't break the corn down with ashes or with lime, you're gonna get sick and you're gonna die. The first thing that's gonna happen is your skin is you're gonna have the worst dermatitis in the world. And as the disease progresses, it eventually you get dysentery, and it ends in dementia, and it's a horrible way to go. We call it by the Italian name, sour skin, pellagra. And it took all the scientists in Spain. They thought maybe it was corn fungus or corn blight that was causing the disease, and actually it was a niacin deficiency that was making people so sick. So lots of backstories with every single one of these products, and so we could go on all day. We love doing this, and so here we are. We're home.
Okay, yeah, this is what I call the Rio Grande acequias, meaning the northern branch of the Rio Grande and all its tributaries, not just the main stem of the river, but as we know, the settlers who came here up the Camino Real, they were in search of water, because that was known in this northern, arid, semi-arid climate that they had already explored. Was deficient in terms of water for agriculture. So they knew that they had to follow the water and actually up to the headwaters to where the snowpack is. As you know, the Rio Grande acequias and all of its tributaries, especially here north of Albuquerque, the reservoir, they don't have reservoirs for the acequias themselves. They're reservoirs for water storage and for the Middle Rio Grande irrigation district and so forth. But the community acequias that we study, they're dependent on that snowpack. That is their reservoir. And so that's why we focus on this type of geography, if you will. And the diversion is really this presa of rocks and brush, as you see here on the left with Jemez Springs. That's the traditional presa. You know, the earlier slide of the Philippines, there was a presa there, but it's built of the materials that they have there. You know, bamboo sticks, boulders, rocks, you know, other material. Well, in New Mexico, it's still boulders, but also twigs and trunks of trees and other debris, you know, packed together like that on this presa. But it works. It's a leaky dam, if you will, but it's intentional that it's leaky. They still let water through so that other users, there's other acequias below this one at Hammond Springs, so they have to have water too. So they don't take all the water, they take only what they need and they let the rest of it go through and seep through. So that's the typical construction. Enrique mentioned earlier that that was the first public works project, you know, of these early settlements, you know, was building this presa. When I talk to students, for example, I ask them, do you know where the birthplace of your community? And sometimes they'll raise their hand and they'll say, well, it was the church, you know. And so, no, really, before the church, the first construction project was the presa. So there it is, the birthplace. On the right-hand side, you see a gentleman irrigating his field. Well, he's another author, okay, in this book, Water for the People. His name is Alejandro Lopez. So make sure you read his chapter because he tells you the experience that he has had in growing just a variety of a multitude of crops in Chile and frijoles and calabacitas and a whole bunch of other crops on his parcel there on the Santa Cruz River. There's his compuerta. That's a very iconic, you know. I consider three iconic figures for the acequia. One is the mayordomo, you know, like the book by Stanley Crawford. That's why he called it that. It's an iconic figure. The other one is this compuerta, because that compuerta for Alejandro is what links him to the physical system of water delivery. He, you know, opens that head gate and water flows out, as you see already entering his rows of crops. That's his connection to the physical delivery system, okay, the acequia in the river where it comes from, diverted from. But it's also his connection to the social organization because, you know, he has to, you know, participate in the Acequia Association, you know, follow the rules, take turns, water sharing, water governance, you know, and all of that that goes together with the social. And of course, the annual limpia, you know, the annual ritual, that's another iconic, you know, image of Acequias. Then lastly, the other one, he's holding one there, but you can't really see it, but it's probably on his side or the front of Alejandro, is the pala, okay, the shovel. Okay, so that's another one. Okay, and then of course here's a whole landscape of an irrigated field in near Corrales here in the Albuquerque area. So that's what we call the historic working landscapes. They're historic because they've been here since 1598 and into the 1690s with you know, De Vargas and others, and then of course the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, and they're still here. Okay, uh, but they're also working landscapes in that they put water to beneficial use. And that's the strategy for people ask, you know, Enrique and myself, well, will the acequia survive and what's their future and so on and so forth? And we always reply, well, as water continues to be put to beneficial use, the acequia agriculture and the working landscapes will continue. So that's really part of the preservation strategy, is to keep land in agriculture.
Okay, on the right, you can see the alternative. This is below Elephant Butte Dam, and it's shocking. You go down there, and by then all of the water of the river is taken out. It's watering the cotton, it's watering the onions, it's watering the extensive pecan groves. They let the river itself die, and this is very controversial, of course. Up north, the courts are looking at things like, well, is the river a person? And yes, the river is a person. The river has, under the law, of course, and the river has rights. The river has rights to at least a little bit of its water because it has a whole ecosystem to support. And so you can see the other side of the coin, not that far downstream. And so that's why we celebrate our water here. We are in love with this culture. People accuse us of romanticizing acequias, and we admit we romanticize them. That's true. But if you don't fall in love with something, then you're not going to defend it with as much passion. And so this gets back to the slogan of the grassroots acequia movement, el agua no se vende, el agua se defiende. Water is not meant to be sold as a commodity. Water is something you defend. So now let's go up to Taos. This chapter is by one of another prodigious farmer and educator, Miguel Santisteban. Jose can tell you about him.
Yeah, well, Miguel, just like Alejandro Lopez, has this fantastic cultivated land, even smaller than Alejandro's, but my gosh, the kinds of things that he grows there. And he's also been known as really the leader for many years as the Sembrando Semillas project of the New Mexico Acequia Association, where they train young people, to become experts, in terms of how to irrigate, how to plant, how to cultivate the plants, how to take care of them, how to be land stewards at the same time, how to use crop rotation, and how to grow traditional crops like garbanzos, and habas and calabacitas, native calabacitas. And he was talking about corn. He's the corn expert of all of New Mexico. And I dare anyone else to nominate someone else because he knows every kind of variety of corn from all over the world, literally. And in fact, he has a seed bank. He's got jars, in his house in there, or a shed behind his house, somewhere in there, jars of all kinds of seeds for corn. There's so many varieties, I can't even begin to list them all. So, and he's pretty expert at growing habas also. So anyway, so this Miguel Santisteban is a fantastic. He's been mayordomo of his acequia. He's been commissioner. He's been everything, and now he's teaching through the web. He's got courses that he offers to the people can sign up through the internet, through his website and so forth. So this title of his chapter is Cultivating a Sensible Food System. And he'll tell you, read his chapter. You'd be surprised, what else, can make for a sustainable food system in addition to the things that are in his photographs here. So that's another chapter. And that too was in the Green Fire Times.
Yeah, you'll see him at the Taos Farmers Market too. And of course, Stanley Crawford was one of the founders of the Santa Fe Farmers Market. We've got to mention, do a little shout out to Silvia Rodriguez, the well-known anthropologist who, in this second half of her career, has dedicated herself to acequia culture and how it works from the perspective of anthropology and how communities unite around these ideals. There's a very deep water ethic. There's a sharing ethic that happens, and it's exactly the opposite of the tragedy of the commons. This is the success of the commons, and we've got to proclaim this from the rooftops that the common good, the common lands, are something that are well taken care of in our culture. So we'll refer you to her amazing article on the little town that she got involved with north of Taos, Valdez, New Mexico.
And by the way, I mentioned earlier that Stanley Crawford's was the first book length, study of acequias. Well, Silva's was the next one. Okay, so she has a book on acequias as well, and the one I wrote as well. So, and then Esteban Arellano. So those are the what I would consider the four. Crawford's book, Sylvia's book, Esteban Arellano's, and mine. So, thank you.
Multidisciplinary from totally different perspectives, but converging on this amazing tradition. So here's Jose. Jose and I are particularly interested in these heroic. The most heroic of the acequia systems in New Mexico, in a lot of ways, are the trans-basin systems where people, in order to live and prosper in one drainage, figure out how to get water from another neighboring watershed and all kinds of ingenious ways. And Jose will tell you about what happens up at San Gregorio Lake in the Jemez, in the Nacimiento Mountains, I should say.
Yes, this is a case study initially that I did years ago, and then when it came time to the book itself, I wrote it up as one of the chapters in the book, and it's called Trans-Basin Diversion in the Forest Wilderness. Okay, so this is really high up because the Cuba Valleys by itself, it had very little in terms of a water supply off of the Nacimiento Mountains. They're not very high. Okay, and there's not much of a snowpack. It's very temporary snow, if any, on the Nacimientos Mountains on the slope that then goes down into Cuba and flows into the Rio Puerco. So the Rio Puerco, as we know, is totally dry. It's a wash, basically. And so to then supplement and actually to get new water supply, they went higher up into the Jemez basin, not the Rio Puerco. So they moved water from one basin to the next. Okay, one watershed to another watershed. They moved it from the Jemez basin to the Rio Puerco through Cuba as the intermediary. Okay, so that was quite a feat. They had to go pretty high up to then dig an acequia by hand tools. Okay, and divert water from one of the tributaries of the Rio Jemez called the Rio de las Vacas. Okay, so then they diverted this water in 1882. That's more than a century ago, of course. Okay, so with hand tools, they went up high in the mountains of Jemez Basin, okay, and dug a ditch from the Rio de las Vacas to then make its way to what they call that's there on the right-hand corner. That's a diversion dam under construction at the Clear Creek, it's called. So it was to supplement this Clear Creek, which was further downstream, but still up in the mountains. Okay, and then from there, empty into what they call Cajete Canyon. There's a canyon to the southwest, I suppose, of this particular place here at Clear Creek, but it dumps over basically into a canyon below the spot where this diversion dam is under construction. But why is it under construction? Well, it turns out that the Rio Jemez adjudication was underway back in the early 1980s, the Busselman adjudication of the Rio Jemez. Okay, and so the adjudication, what it does, it measures water, who owns water, how much water, and adjudicates it and puts priority dates to everything and then quantifies and so forth. So the irrigators from Cuba, going back to them, because this is their ditch, okay? The organization is called Nacimiento Community Ditch Association. Nacimiento Community Ditch Association. Okay, they were obligated under a consent order with the judge, the hearing officer for the adjudication. They agreed to a consent order to rebuild this intermediary dam called Clear Creek Diversion, so that the water could then be measured, so that they would only be allowed to take only what was their share of the adjudicated water rights. Well, to build this diversion dam to the specifications, there was one huge problem. Huge problem. This spot here on the upper right-hand corner is in the forest wilderness. And if you look at the posted sign there, national forest wilderness, close to motor vehicles and motorized equipment. And area back of this sign is managed and protected under public law, U.S. Code, etc. Violations punishable. And it has a sign there, U.S. Forest Service. Okay. So they were not allowed to take motorized equipment, chainsaws, or even pickup trucks or nothing like that. Initially, not even wheelbarrows, because wheelbarrows were defined in the U.S. Forest Service handbook as mechanical contrivances, meaning that they were contrivances that were human design and that they were powered by humans. Well, eventually they were allowed to take wheelbarrows, but they were not allowed to take pickup trucks or other, transport kind of materials. They had to establish a camp outside of the wilderness, still in the forest, but outside of the wilderness, part of the forest, and take these boulders and vigas and lumber and other cement and sand, take them by horsepack in a wagon with rubber wheels, okay, pulled by horses. So they had a hard time, complying with this consent order. They also have water from this lake there at the bottom. That's San Gregorio Lake. Some of you may have been there fishing or hunting or visiting or whatever, If Enrique goes up there and establishes a sheep camp, he calls it once every summer, and he stays there for a while. Anyway, so that's Gregorio Lake. That's another water source, but that too is in the forest wilderness. So this diversion dam and the Gregorio Lake itself are both water sources for Cuba, the Cuba Valley, the irrigators, Nacimiento Community Ditch Association. But they were not allowed to take this equipment. Well, they battled it with the U.S. Forest Service. It's what I call, it's a story of David and Goliath. David, of course, of the irrigators. They were only at that time 172 irrigators, parciantes, local people. They had to battle the permit system of the U.S. Forest Service and ask permission to go up in the wilderness and take the chainsaws and their pickup trucks and so forth to remove debris and rocks and other things that have fallen over the winter months, clear it out, do the limpia and all of that. And the Forest Service said, no, you cannot do that in the wilderness part of the forest. Now, keep in mind, the wilderness forest in this place was new. It was 1964 when it was a national forest already since 1915, part of the Santa Fe National Forest, but in 1964, a section of it, the higher up, the best, forested area, the watershed there was in the wilderness. So they were not allowed to take this up there, even though they predated. Like I said, the first diversion of Rio de las Vacas was in 1882. Okay, then even Gregorio Lake, that was much later. That was in the 40s and expanded in the 50s, 1940s, 1950s. But that predates 1964 by far. Okay, so anyway, so they finally they won the battle. David, won the battle, but they had to battle against the Cuba forest ranger who lives there and has a lot to say about what goes on or what does not happen and get permits and so forth and so forth. Then they had to go to the Santa Fe forest supervisor located in Santa Fe there. Then they had to come to Albuquerque to the regional forester. And then eventually the final decisions as to whether they could take motorized equipment and pickups and chainsaws had to be made in Washington, D.C. by the chief of the U.S. Forest Service. Took 7 years. Okay, 7 years after the consent decree of the year 2000. Then in 2007, finally, the Forest Service agrees that they could then enter the forest wilderness with this kind of equipment. But it took an elder, a gentleman by the name of Manuel Crispin. He presented oral history testimony that when he was a youngster, a young adult, that he personally knew and witnessed and took his own truck or a family truck up to the wilderness, what's now wilderness. And they also used chainsaws in the 1940s. So of course that's before 1964. So then he even drew a map. Okay, here's how we got there. This is where we went up to the Rio Las Vacas and diverted the water at that point. And he cleaned out the acequia there. And his testimony won the day. The U.S. Forest Service finally acquiesced, and they agreed to let them do this every time that they have to go clean out the diversion and the canal there. So that's the story of David and Goliath.
Great story. The yeah, I love this story. We should add that the people of Jemez Pueblo, in their wisdom as good neighbors, they were not about to take water away from their neighbors, many of whom they're related to, and so they reached an agreement outside of court and said if things get rough, Jemez Pueblo has the right to 4 days of water, and everyone else can take their 3. And this water is measured, and there is harmony that was forged because of this water and the respect that people have for it. We're going to take you back to another great story. This is the one of the famous waterfall ditches of Mora. This is one of the first ones. It's called the Acequia del, what's the name of it, Jose? Del Rito Griego y la Sierra.
Yes, Acequia de la Presa del Rito Griego y la Sierra, something like that. Yeah.
A long name. And anyway, this is one of the uppermost towns in the Mora Valley, Chacon, today's Chacon. And when people came over in the early 19th century, they loved the Mora Valley for the new opportunities it granted them to expand and raise their families. But they saw that there was very little water, very little water there. And so they figured a way to get some of the water that goes down into the Rio Grande on the other side of this view. And they tapped some high altitude lakes and the little streams that connect them. And they would get it together. They'd follow the contours. This acequia, the first date that we have for it is in the 1860s, 1865, I believe. And it was going full blast at that point in time, since many of the people had relations with Picuris Pueblo, because the Comanche Wars, during the Comanche Wars, this was a route that the Comanches took over into New Mexico, and they just go up the Mora Valley. And so you couldn't, it was too dangerous. People lived in Picuris together. And so the people that made this acequia system and this almost 1,000-foot waterfall, we've got pictures of it. They asked the elders, this is oral history, they asked the elders of Picuris for permission to get the water so they could live on the other side. And that agreement, unfortunately, never reached a piece of paper. There was a lawyer that was working on it, and an agreement was never reached. But now, at some point in the future, it will have to be, presumably, as the adjudication proceeds. But in the meantime, here's a community that since the 1830s has been in the Mora Valley making a living. And so we turned the legends. There's a story, every place where there's bears, there's stories of the bear's son. This is Juan del Oso, this kid. And this story is told in Spain in Spanish. It's told in Peru in Spanish and Quechua. It's told in German. It's a European story, but there's American stories about that. There's Alaska Native stories about the great bears. And anyway, here's this kid who's the son of the bear, and he grows up really fast. In fact, takes him about 3 months to become a young adult, and he has superpowers, and all the all the superheroes back in the day had the same name, both in Spanish and in English. Their name was Juan, John. What's the nickname for John in English? Jack. Jack. He's the guy. He's the guy with the magic beans. He's the guy who's really, really strong and makes things happen. These are jacktails. And in Spanish, we call them Los Juanes, Los Juanes. And so this is one of them. And we just connected the story to the history. We connected the legend to the history of the acequias of the Mora Valley, which are some of the most beautiful and extensive in New Mexico. And now 40 of them are still in ruins. They're full of silt, and it's just this tragedy that we confronted on the eve of putting this book together. But anyway, yes, you defend what you love. We love acequias, and kids learn to love them too. Jose mentioned the Sembrando Semillas youth program, where they you got to get the kids out there. You got to get them wet. That's how to get it. That's how this is going to survive into the future, through teaching, the kind of teaching that happens in families, in schools, with books, with ideas, and with the inherent ethics of water, the ancient ethics of water. And we'll end with talking about this grassroots movement and what is coming together. So much has happened in the past 35 years in the movement, in the acequia movement in New Mexico, the grassroots acequia movement. And this is a shot from the annual Congreso de las Acequias. It's given in a different community every year. This shot is from Taos. Hey, there's Esteban Arellano with the red shirt. He's not facing us, unfortunately. There's his wife, Elena. There's Silvia Rodriguez right next to her. These are activists. And el agua es la vida. Water is life. The other sign, I've got one that I use on my acequia for our meetings. El agua no se vende, el agua se defiende. And someday, maybe when the U.S. joins UNESCO, we're not a member of UNESCO yet, but excuse me, a lot of people, a lot of colleagues in Smithsonian, they help out with UNESCO policy, cultural policy. We're not yet a member. Maybe someday we will be a member, and our acequia communities will join this amazing world community of intangible cultural heritage. It's not any single acequia, it's the heritage itself that has made it through so many generations and will proceed into many generations more with a lot of work and a lot of collaboration and a lot of teaching and a lot of study. Jose.
Well, yes, just a couple of things, on the right hand, on the right hand slide there, that's iconic also in the sense that this is the only log flume traditional, aqueduct made out of logs, carved out from logs, from timber from the nearby forest. This is Las Trampas, okay, past Truchas on the way to Penasco. If you look at the right-hand side of that state highway, you'll miss it if you don't know that's there. But you look down, just right after the church of Las Trampas. Okay, very noticeable, landmark. After the church of Trampas, just keep on going up the mountain there, a very short distance, and you'll see this traditional aqueduct, made out of timbers from the forest. Now, it's actually part of the acequia. There it is. So you see acequia further back in the background there. Well, it just continues the way it's already going and flowing. And of course, gravity flow bringing it the contours of the land, and it crosses this arroyo here. And then after crossing this arroyo, it's got to cross the state highway, which it does. And then it goes down below to irrigate further downstream from there. So that's very important. Those logs, despite being wood material, of course, they last a long time. I've only seen them replaced once, okay, that I know about, because the water supposedly carries, minerals and other material that then help to, line the bottom of the flume there, of the logs, and so forth. And anyway, it just keeps on working. It's a working technology. And there were many of these, probably dozens, if not more, throughout north central New Mexico. Every time there was a space there that they needed to cross over on arroyo, this is what they used, locally available materials, appropriate technology, we could call it, sustainability. They just go up to the mountains to get more of these, and then they, with an axe, they hand-hewn kind of carving out of the inside of the log, and then they brace them together, and then they build this crib, they call it, supporting, down below. Okay. The other one on the left-hand corner, this is from another chapter in the book. There's a chapter about La Limpia, and it was written by Donatella Davanzo. And there you see the workers, including this youngster, is holding the shovel, the closest to us there, the youth of the community, and this happens to be nearby in Placitas. Okay, there's an acequia system in Placitas, even though it doesn't get water from the Rio Grande, as you might expect, this part of the Middle Grande Valley. No, it gets it from springs that come from the Sandia Mountains. There's two major springs there, El Tanque del Oso, and then the La Ciruela, and then there's another one, Tanquecito, but they get water from these springs, and that's what goes into these acequias that irrigate the farmland in Placitas. One of them even supplies domestic water for the community. Now that one is protected. It's like a mine shaft, if you will. At least it resembles one, to protect the water, that it's clear and clean as it comes out, and it fills up the water tank. And then from there, it pipes its way down for domestic use in the parts of Placitas. The other part that continues flowing to fill up a tank, a holding pond, and then that's the used irrigation water. So that's really a hybrid. That's very unique. That's the only one I've ever seen. That's both domestic water and irrigation water off of the same spring. Okay. Then the upper one, that's the one Enrique was alluding to. That's the annual meeting of the Congreso de las Acequias. This last one was at Ranchos, the Taos. They've held it there numerous times. It's been in Santa Fe many times as well, Las Vegas at the campus of New Mexico Highlands. And that really is a powerful movement. And I go there at all of their congresos, and sometimes to some of their workshops, and that's where I learn. That's where I study. I keep studying acequias. It never ends. And that's one of the places that I do this at.
Yeah, I should add, as we're wrapping it up here, I just really wanted to thank José. He's one of my teachers, and I work with acequias well, just about every day, every week in the summertime. I'm a commissioner on the Álamos de los Gallegos Acequia Association here in the North Valley, and we come together. We're having our annual meeting a week from Saturday, and we work hard. We've got an 80-year-old system that we're trying to rehabilitate. These were victory gardens back in World War II and after the Depression, and neglected public infrastructure that can produce food is getting more and more rare. So I'm involved in that movement. I should mention one thing about those flumes, Jose. Armando, of course, lives in Oslo. He lives in Norway, and turns out they've got acequias in Norway. Who would have thought? But in Western Norway, there's an area called Lom, Lom. It's where the famous writer Knut Hansen was from. And they are way, way high up on a mountain, and down way down below, there's a fjord. But it's in an area where there's a little bit of a rain shadow. And they, about 800 years ago, they decided to start channeling the water. And all these people who had been Vikings and who were very, very good woodworkers, they would take trees, and there's a way of topping like a spruce tree and letting it fill up with sap, so that the lumber that you get out of it can be used in ships at sea. Those Viking ships that are still, there's the wood in some of them is still good after so long. And of course, when they joined Christendom, they took that skill into making those stave churches, those wooden churches that are 1,000 years old, 800 years old. And in Lom, they have acequias that look very much like this one. They're made entirely out of what we would call canoas. And some of those channels are 600, 700 years old, just because these are the people that know how to cure the wood and how to grow the wood so it's going to last literally for centuries. So Armando's hoping that maybe Jose and I will go over there and we'll all visit Lom together, because who would have thought? I mean, if there's acequias in the Philippines, sure enough, there they are in Norway and all over the world. This is a world phenomenon, and we are so pleased that we were chosen by the Historical Society of New Mexico for one of their top book awards, the Fray Francisco Atanasio Dominguez Award. He's famous, of course, for the big expedition that he did into southern Colorado and up to Utah. It was the beginnings of the old Spanish Trail, and he, of course, wrote a lot about New Mexico's the mission communities all over the place, the communities in which the original teachers were the Tlaxcalteca Indians. They came to teach agriculture. They told people, you are as we are people of the corn. We are people of the corn, but wait till you taste wheat. Wait till you taste peaches and apples. We are here to share these things with you, and we've had this hybrid, wonderful mestizo agriculture ever since. And so just telling these stories, making them accessible to people. This is not scholarship. This is based on scholarship, but this is storytelling. We wrote this book to tell these stories to people, to other irrigators, to people interested in this worldwide tradition. And so we'll end with that. And it's more than just a slogan. People work hard to defend the community control of water as a basic resource. Instead of the state trying to control everything, local control has been so important in the evolution of this tradition, that just telling this story is very important to us, to our state, to our region, to our nation, and the rest of the world. So el agua no se vende, el agua se defiende. And thanks to our listeners, thanks to the New Mexico History Museum for the opportunity to present this at our leisure. Before Jose, none of this was in books. Before Sylvia, before Stanley Crawford, it was in little books. It was in notebooks that acequia associations kept long ago. And this is part of our government now. We are subdivisions of the state. And it's a tradition we are so proud of and so glad to share with you all.
I agree. Thank you all.
All right, Enrique, Jose, thank you for this rich, varied, and most informative discussion of Acequia communities and its people, not only in New Mexico, but globally. And in the process have really broadened our understanding of the dynamism that underlays all efforts to retain and hopefully and expand Acequia use. There are so many possible questions. It's hard to capture the richness of what you've shared, in just a couple of questions. But let me ask one or two nonetheless. Personally, I've been particularly struck by learning that there were about 700 active communities acequias in New Mexico and another 75 in Colorado. I never would have imagined it to be that large a community. I assume the ones in Colorado are predominantly from the San Luis Valley, but further reflections come from the broader discussions in your book of the resilience of acequia-based communities in innumerable locations throughout New Mexico, but also the world, and how sustaining acequias in these communities has enriched and deepened their community spirit, the quality of their life. I was wondering if there are other communities in the greater Southwest, which are also benefiting from the acequia networks. I wonder if they're given as much attention as there is in northern New Mexico.
I guess in going to the congresos, I've noticed that some of the strongest delegations are from the Gila area, and specifically the Mimbres River that flows south from the Gila. There are acequia associations there, and then further down the Gila River, there's irrigation going on too, and there's been a huge fight down there to just leave the Gila alone. It's a small river. It's the only free-flowing river left in New Mexico, in New Mexico, because there's of course big dams further down on the Gila, but in the lower Gila, there's a number of farms, a number of Mormon settlers went into that area, and they you can't really call them acequias because they're organized in a very different way. The Mormons, of course, are a water-loving people. Everywhere they go, they make acequias, and they have. If you've gone through Utah, you will see them everywhere, and they. I don't know much about the organization of them, although I got my first teaching job in Rema, New Mexico, which has an irrigation lake and some agriculture down below it. But I guess the idea is that the acequia is much more than just the physical ditch. In fact, look at the word ditch. It ditches. They don't. You think of ditches as being kind of dirty. I don't know. It's just not a very mellifluous word, right? Just the way acequia is water carrier. It's a beautiful word to us, but of course it's all about communities. The acequia is the community, the history plus the infrastructure that it maintains. So it's very important to emphasize that these are acequia communities. They are acequia landscapes. If you go to areas like the Mora Valley, it looks very green, or used to. It's going to come back. And I always say to people, it's originally the valleys of Mora had a little riparian green area just right down by where the little streams were, but those so it's semi-arid, Mora is a semi-arid area. And so you could say that the landscapes are culturally green. They're not naturally green. They are culturally green because people made them that way. And you would never realize this just driving through. But because if you go further north in Colorado, you find nice green valleys that are just naturally green because you're up in Colorado. But down here in New Mexico, if you're going through a green valley, chances are pretty good that you're in an acequia landscape. So that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, if I could add to that, in terms of outside of New Mexico and outside of the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado, the other acequia systems that I studied that are somewhat still there are the ones in San Antonio, Texas. Okay, the missions there, the 5 major missions from the San Antonio de Valero, which is now the famous Alamo monument and so forth. Okay, the the San Jose mission, the Espada mission, the San Juan mission. Okay, all of those were agricultural mission settlements, and just like in the Philippines, the missionaries are the ones that organized a lot of these zanjas or zanjeras in the Philippines. Well, likewise, of course, in San Antonio, Texas, the missionaries who went there established these small towns, if you will, and to have a food supply for everybody. There had to be agriculture, and so the natives, the indigenous people, built the acequias of San Antonio. Okay, and now there's only San Antonio got urbanized, just like Murcia and Valencia and Albuquerque and Santa Fe included, heavily urbanized and wiped out, destroyed, some of these acequia systems. Well, same thing with San Antonio, but there are still 2 in the south of San Antonio, the Espada acequia and the San Juan acequia. Okay. So those are now their governance is very different, just like Enrique mentioned. These other places that have these, you could call them canals, you could call them ditches. Okay, but acequias is more than a canal. An acequia is more than a ditch. There people say that, and what they mean is that there's a governance and social and cultural system tied in with the idea of an acequia. It's a community thing, and it comes from that word that was mentioned earlier, querencia. People developed, just like they have this passion and love of water, equally so, they have this passion and love of land. These are land-based peoples. They came up the Camino Real with the promise of land grants, and they were granted, by the Spanish government initially, and even more so by the Mexican government later. And so they became landowners. So you become a landowner, and that changes, how you look at things and how you perceive the world and so forth. And so this attachment, this querencia, Esteban Arellano wrote a lot about that, and so has Enrique and Levi Romero and others. The poet Levi Romero, and this querencia is very strong, not just in the Mora Valley, but in all of these places that we've been talking about, Taos and Truchas and Trampas and, other places where there's acequias, querencia. The other strong motivation is another word that we use is mutualismo, mutualism, because for these systems to work and operate and for people to follow the rules and share the water and show up for the day of the limpia to clean out the ditch and all of that, uh, they have to have a belief and an understanding of reciprocity, that if you show up, so is your neighbor going to show up. The vecinos, the concept of vecinos, these land grant settlers, when they first got here, they were referred to as pobladores, settlers. It's how you translate it, pobladores, settlers. But once they established roots, once they dug out that presa, constructed the presa and dug out the acequia madre and all its laterals, then they became vecinos, because to sustain water flowing, distribution of water, water sharing, because it's a scarce commodity. they worked as neighbors. Vecinos was the word, citizens, and that's where this idea of mutual benefit. You work together, you work cooperatively, just like the Sanqueras of the Philippines, cooperative irrigation societies, as they're called. Well, these acequias of New Mexico and Colorado they're the same thing. Cooperative irrigation societies. Okay, and they are all self-governed. They're recognized in state statutes as political subdivisions of the state. And very importantly, they have autonomy. They can make decisions at any given meeting, adjust the water flow distribution, adjust to things that are going on. They don't have to check with a state engineer or anybody else, or local government or county government, none of those. Autonomy. And that's key to their survival, is this solidarity based on reciprocity and what Silvia calls respeto, respect.
Another thing to add there, that we could have said this at the beginning. The acequia governance are the grassroots of democracy in the Southwest. It wasn't coming from above, because we had autocratic governments, we had imperial colonial governments, in fact, 2 layers of them. And the democratic traditions here, going clear back to Spanish colonial times, of course, the king isn't very interested in democracy, but the local democratic institutions are the acequias, and of course the cabildos. The cabildos are the town councils that you see all over Latin America, and that's where we didn't have a Magna Carta, but that's where our democratic traditions came from. The kind of self-governance that Jose just spoke about.
Wow. Thank you. It really captures the, the institutional strength of these organizations. I want to thank you again, both of you, for really, bringing your book alive, for sharing so many of the lovely personal stories, and the variety and character of so many of these communities, which yet have this underlying commonality. And we look forward to sharing this with our audience. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Time. We're all volunteers here.
Yes, we are. Yeah, good.
Well,
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks
okay.
again. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Copies of Enrique's and Jose's co-edited anthology, Water for People, is available via the UNM Press website, shown below, or through your favorite bookstore at bookshop.org. In closing, a reminder to all to check out the Friends of History webpage, where you can again watch this lecture as well as other First Wednesday lectures covering a wide range of topics of historical interest about New Mexico, the Southwest, and the Greater West. Do come back to the webpage to learn about our upcoming 2024 topics in our First Wednesday lecture series, and more broadly about the Friends of History itself. You can join our mailing list either via the webpage, the website, or by emailing us at nmhmfriendsofhistory@gmail.com. Finally, consider making a donation, however small, so that we can continue to provide these informative lectures and presentations throughout the year. We thank you for your support, both in the past and in the future. We look forward to seeing you in the months ahead. Goodbye for now.